Hey, Algebra 2 students, this is some extra practice on lesson 14b, sketching graphs. By the end of the day, we should be able to sketch our graphs of functions given their, their factored form. And this is our standard, identify the zeros. We'll definitely be doing that as part of this, and then use those zeros to construct a rough graph of the function. That's exactly what we're doing today. When we say sketch, it's rough, it's not perfect, but it does give us an idea of the overall picture. Let's dive right in with these notes. We're going to walk through the notes. We'll check ourselves on one example, and then you have 3 problems to practice on the back. All right. Our job is to sketch the graph of this function. Last time we learned how zeros can help us identify graphs. Now we're going to use them first to help us make a plot. So first, it says step 1, we got to find the zeros because those are going to be useful, and plot them. Well, looking at our expression here, I see I'm going to set equations for each of these. X equals 0 is our first term. The second one is x minus 1 equals 0. And the last term, well, there's actually 2 of these, but it's x plus 2 equals 0. So if we made our little table, I think our solutions would be x equals 0 with multiplicity 0. 0 is multiplicity just 1, that happened once. X equals, for that middle term, positive 1. That also happened once, so that has multiplicity 1. And then the last one is x equals negative 2. And that had multiplicity 2. Because again, if we wrote this out fully factored, like I'm about to over here, that's what that whole thing squared means, is it's just being multiplied by itself. So it had multiplicity 2, and each of the others had multiplicity 1. And now we have to plot them. So when I'm deciding how to label my blank grid like this, I notice I have x values that I care about. They go from, the smallest one I have is negative 2. The biggest one I have is positive 1. So it's really not that much space. I'm just going to make my axis kind of right in the middle. And then at this point, I'm not even going to count or assign values to these. I'm just going to label these points just by looking at it. So x is 0, that's right in the middle, obviously. 1, I'm going to put a little ways over. I want to use my space. And then negative 2, I'm going to put a little ways, maybe twice as far away from the center on the other side. So this is completely a sketch. I didn't count anything. I just approximated where a negative and a positive would be. Now we have plotted our zeros. I'm going to check. Cool. Step 1, done. Step 2, we have 3 different sections here. 1, 2, and 3. Our job next is to plot check points on each intervals to figure out the sign of our graph. So we know our graph's going to go on here somewhere. It could look like, I'm going to make a sketch, don't write this down. It could look something like that. Because that's a graph, let me do that again. It could look something like that. That's a graph that has zeros at the places that we found. Or it could look like this. I mean, that's kind of a crazy one, but that's also a graph that has zeros at the places around. So there's a lot of different graphs that it could be. We're going to figure out if it's positive or negative on each of these intervals to help us decide what our graph actually looks like. So I'm going to pick a point on each interval. My first interval is over here to the left. I'm going to highlight that region. Over here to the left, I'm going to use for that one negative 3, x equals negative 3, because that's all the way to the left. In the middle interval, somewhere between these two, maybe negative 1, x equals negative 1. That would be somewhere in that middle bit there. The next group is, it's right between those. How about between 0 and 1? How about 1/2? X equals 0.5, or 1/2. And then the last section we need to check over here in red is going to be just something bigger than 1. Oh, we'll just do 2. It's just 1 bigger than 2. X equals 2. So those are our places that we want to check. Now we're going to plug them into our function in each of those places and see what values we get. Now I'm going to do these. We don't have a lot of space. I'm going to do these. I count on you to maybe use a calculator if you're stuck on these. I'm going to do these kind of quickly. The first one, x is negative 3. I'm going to make a little note how I would do that up here. It would be x is negative 3 is the first part, Then it'll be -3 minus 1, and then -3 plus 2 all squared. So I see it's going to be a positive 12. It's going to be positive 12 here, and this is going to be a -1 squared, or just a 1. So that's just going to be positive 12. So our value would be 12 at x equals -3, which means it's positive. So what I can do now is, knowing over here on this yellow section, before we didn't know if our graph was going to be below or above the x-axis. Now we know it has to be above it. So that'll help us make our sketch in a second. For the second one, -1, negative times a negative is a positive. It's a positive. I think this is also going to be a positive. It's going to be 2 times 1. It's just going to be 2. So at -1, it's going to be a positive 2. If I plug in 1/2, I would have to use a calculator on this one, but I see that even without evaluating it, it's going to be a positive, negative, positive. So it's going to be a negative sign overall. I didn't even plug that in. I'm just checking the sign. And then 2, positive, negative. It's going to be x is 2. If I plug that in, it's going to be 2 times 2. That's positive times a positive. So that's going to be a positive. So let me go and refine my sketches here. So we have a positive, a negative, and a positive. In the orange section, that one gave us a positive, so I know it's going to be up here somewhere. In the blue section, that was our only negative, so I'm going to put my negative down here. And in the red section, that's my only positive, so it's going to be up here somewhere. So now that we have identified if it's going to be positive or negative on each of these intervals, now I can actually make the sketch of my graph. I'm going to do it in green, and I'm going to do it really big so we can see it. I'm going to start on this right side over here. I know it's going to be positive coming in, and it's going to cross over and go negative. And then it needs to get back over and hit that 0. So I'm going to come back up and hit the 0. And then it's going to go positive. And then it actually here, it doesn't cross over to the negative. It stays and goes back up positive. So I might want to round that out a little bit more. But what's nice about this is we can kind of refine our sketch. We know it's got to go up here, it's got to come down, and it's got to go like that. So that might be a nice little sketch. Again, it's a very rough sketch, but it does give us an idea of what our graph should look like. Next, you could check this in a calculator, plug it in, just to confirm that your sketch looks about right. All right, so at this point, you should pause the video, follow the steps that we've done up here, step 1, 2, and 3, and make a sketch down here. After you've gone through it, you should restart the video, watch what I'm doing, check yourself, or make corrections if you were confused. So, hopefully you've done that. I'm going to start right in. I see, first of all, that this is not factored all the way down, but I do recognize that that's a difference of squares. So I'm going to factor that really quick. X minus 2, x plus 2. And then I still have my x plus 3 term. So that gives me zeros of x equals 2, x equals -2, and x equals -3. Got my zeros. They all have multiplicity 1. Let's plot them. Just quickly, x is 2. So my furthest left is -3. My furthest right is 2. So I'm going to make my -3 first because it's kind of going to be the biggest thing. -2 would be a little bit closer, maybe like right about here. And then +2 would be over here somewhere. So again, that's a really loose sketch. I'm not calculating or counting anything. I'm just kind of eyeballing where these values could fall so that I have lots of space in my graph. Then we got to check points in each of our intervals. So we got to check a point less than, got to check a point less than -3, a point between those two, a point there, and a point after. So we got to check 4 values. I'm going to pick something less than -3 is -4. Something between those two is -2.5. Something between those two is going to be x equals 0. That might be an easy one. And then x equals 3 would be on the outside. So I picked values that fall in each of these 4 sections. And I'm going to kind of color them again so you can see what sections they're falling in. Orange, orange, blue, blue, and then red, red. So I just colored those sections so you can see where I'm getting these values. Now all I care about is the sign, if it's positive or negative. I don't really care about the values because we're just making a sketch. So I'm using a calculator. I have a calculator up in front of me right now. I'm just going to plug these in really quick. Negative 4 squared is going to be 16 minus 4, and then that's times negative 1. So that's a positive and a negative. That's going to give me a negative for this. Oops. Look at that. It's going to be a negative value. So I know over here in this section, I'm going to fix my color. It's going to be negative. Now between these two, a negative 2.5, negative 2.5, negative 2.5 times negative 2.5 minus 4, and then answer times 0.5. It's going to be a positive. When x is 0, it's going to be negative 4 and a positive. So negative positive, so that's going to be negative. Again, you could plug these in all the way if you would like. And then this is going to be 9 minus 4 is a positive, and 6 is a positive, 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 positive. Cool. So these actually just alternate positive, negative between each section. So I'm going to fix my colors so that we can see. On the orange section, it's going to be positive up in here. In the blue section, it's going to be negative. And in the red section, it's going to be positive again. So now I just need to make my sketch. And we go up and down and up and out. Something like that. It's not a perfect sketch. It does give us a really broad picture of what it looks like. You could check yourself in a calculator if you weren't sure. All right, so that's it for the walkthrough. I know it happened kind of quickly. If you'd like to go back and slow down and check things out, you're welcome to. But really, those 3 steps are what we need to do. Most of these on the back are already, first one's already factored. This one you're going to have to do a little bit of factoring. But then you're just following through those steps to make the graphs. So try these out, check your solutions with your intervention teacher, and that will be what you need to do to get credit for your extra practice on lesson 14B.